There is a sensor in your phone that has no permission prompt, no privacy indicator, no operating system warning, and no App Store disclosure. It sits next to the accelerometer on a tiny piece of silicon about the size of a grain of rice. Any app you install can read it silently, in the background, at a sampling rate high enough to reconstruct the sound of human speech sitting next to your device. That sensor is the gyroscope, and the attack against it has a name, published research behind it, and a working proof of concept dating back over a decade. The research paper is called Gyrophone. It was published in 2014 by Jan Michalewski, Dan Boneh, and Gabi Nakibli at Stanford University and the Israeli Defense Forces Cyber Research Unit. The title of their paper was direct: Recognizing Speech from Gyroscope Signals. What they demonstrated was not theoretical. They took standard Android phones, used the standard Gyroscope API available to any application, and showed that the vibrations produced by a human voice speaking near the device were enough to partially reconstruct that voice from raw motion data. They recovered digits, hot words, and speaker identities. No microphone access required. Let me explain why this works, because it sounds like it shouldn't. A gyroscope in your phone is a MEMS device, meaning micro-electromechanical system. Inside is a tiny vibrating mass suspended by silicon beams. When the phone rotates, the Coriolis effect causes that mass to deflect, and sensors measure the deflection as an angular velocity reading. That is the intended function. The unintended function is that the vibrating mass is, in effect, a microphone. Sound waves are pressure waves moving through air. When those pressure waves hit your phone's surface, they produce microscopic vibrations. The gyroscope's suspended mass responds to those vibrations. The readings you get back are not clean audio, but they are not random either. They encode a signal that correlates with the acoustic energy in the environment. Here is where the technical detail matters. Modern Android devices, until patches rolled out after the research was disclosed, allowed apps to sample the gyroscope at rates up to 200 Hz or higher. Human speech occupies a frequency band roughly from 80 Hz to 250 Hz for fundamental vocal tones, with harmonics reaching higher. A 200 Hz gyroscope sampling rate, under the Nyquist theorem, can capture signals up to 100 Hz cleanly. That is enough to pick up male voices. With aliasing effects and trained machine learning models, researchers extracted more. The Gyrophone team used hidden Markov models and dynamic time warping to classify spoken digits with accuracy well above random chance. Later research pushed this further using deep neural networks. You might be asking the obvious question. If this was published in 2014, why are we talking about it in 2026? The answer is that the fix was partial. The fix was platform-specific, and the underlying physics has not changed. Google responded by capping the default gyroscope sampling rate for untrusted apps on Android. iOS applied similar restrictions. But those caps apply to standard APIs. Sensor fusion frameworks, motion coprocessors, and system-level services can still access higher rate data. Research published as recently as 2020 and beyond has shown that accelerometers, which are even less restricted than gyroscopes in many frameworks, can also pick up voice. A paper called Spearphone demonstrated using the accelerometer to eavesdrop on the phone's own loudspeaker output, recovering voice calls and media playback. Another line of research, Pitchlin, used networked IoT accelerometers to cooperatively reconstruct speech across a room. So the category of attack is not closed. It is active. Let me walk you through the threat model, because that is where theory meets practice. The adversary is any application you install that has no microphone permission. That could be a flashlight app, a weather widget, a free game downloaded from a questionable app store. The app cannot record audio directly because you would be prompted, and a microphone indicator would illuminate on modern phones. But the app can subscribe to motion sensor events. Those events carry no permission prompt on most operating systems. The app streams that data to a remote server. The server runs a machine learning model trained to extract whatever information the adversary cares about. That might be spoken digits, because digits leak credit card numbers and PINs. That might be wake words, because knowing what you say to your voice assistant reveals your commands and preferences. That might be speaker identification, confirming whose phone is whose when multiple devices are in the same room. There is a related category of attack that is worth understanding because it uses the same physical principle in reverse. It is called acoustic side-channel cryptography. Researchers have demonstrated recovering encryption keys from the sound of a laptop's power regulator, the whine of capacitors as a CPU processes data. The original Genkin, Shamir, and Tromer paper from 2014 showed that a smartphone placed next to a laptop could recover RSA keys by listening to the computer's coil whine during decryption operations. The phone did not need to hear a voice. It needed to hear a CPU. The gyroscope attack is simply the same insight applied to a different sensor and a different signal. Anything that vibrates, anything that encodes information in physical motion, is a potential channel. What makes this genuinely concerning is the permission model of modern operating systems. When Android and iOS designed their permission systems, they prioritized sensors that a reasonable user would identify as privacy sensitive. The microphone is one. The camera is one. The location APIs are one. Motion sensors were categorized as low risk because the use cases were thought to be benign. Step counting, screen rotation, compass headings, game controls tilting a virtual steering wheel. No one, at the time permissions were architected, expected motion sensors to function as audio recording devices. The permission boundary was drawn in the wrong place relative to the physics. Since then, operating systems have added some friction. iOS requires a motion and fitness permission for sustained high-rate access in certain contexts. Android 12 and later restrict background sensor access and sampling, rates for apps that are not actively in the foreground. But these are mitigations, not solutions. A foreground app with a plausible reason to use motion data, a fitness tracker, a level and compass utility, a driving app can still access enough data to be dangerous. And on the web, browser APIs like Device Motion Event and Device Orientation Event historically exposed similar data to any website you visited, until browser vendors tightened access behind HTTPS requirements and permission prompts. Safari and Chrome have restricted this aggressively in recent years, but older devices and unusual configurations can still leak. Here is what I want you to take away at a practical level. First, the gyroscope attack is real but situational. It requires the phone to be on a surface that carries the vibration, typically a table next to the person speaking, not in a pocket where body tissue damps the signal heavily. It requires training data to build a reliable model for the target speaker or target vocabulary. It produces partial reconstruction, not crystal clear audio. An adversary using this technique is not casually listening to your conversations the way a malware-installed microphone recording would. They are probing for specific data, specific words, specific patterns. Second, the broader lesson is that sensor fusion is the future of surveillance research. Your phone contains a gyroscope, an accelerometer, a magnetometer, a barometer, ambient, light sensors, proximity sensors, and on many devices, additional sensors like humidity, temperature, or ultrasonic microphones not labeled as microphones. Each of these produces a data stream. Each data stream, taken alone, looks innocuous. Taken together, processed through machine learning, they form a fingerprint of your environment, your activity, and in some cases, your speech. A 2019 paper from researchers at Cambridge and other institutions called Sensor ID demonstrated that the raw calibration data of your accelerometer and gyroscope was unique enough to serve as a device fingerprint, identifying your phone across apps and even across browser sessions without any traditional tracking identifier. Apple and Google have since addressed this specific fingerprint, but the broader principle remains. Third, what can you do? The options are limited, and I will be honest with you about that. On iOS, you can review which apps have requested motion and fitness access under Settings, Privacy, Motion, and Fitness, and revoke anything unnecessary. On Android, sensor access is more fragmented, but under Settings, Privacy, Permission Manager, or Settings, Apps, App Permissions, you can review physical activity permissions for individual apps. You cannot fully disable gyroscope access for all applications without breaking the phone's core functionality, because the operating system itself uses motion data for screen orientation and other basic tasks. You can reduce your exposure by installing fewer apps, particularly from developers you do not trust. You can prefer open-source operating systems like Graphene OS, which apply stricter permission defaults and allow finer-grained sensor control. On Graphene OS, for example, you can revoke the sensor's permission from individual apps entirely, something that stock Android does not expose cleanly. For the more technically inclined, there are research directions worth following. Differential privacy applied to sensor data, where operating systems deliberately inject noise into sensor readings for untrusted apps, has been proposed. Some Android implementations do this selectively. Hardware-level fixes, where gyroscope sampling rates are mechanically capped at a frequency below human voice fundamentals, have been discussed but face trade-offs against legitimate use cases like high-precision image stabilization, virtual reality tracking, and fitness applications that need responsive motion data. The broader pattern here is worth naming because it appears across the privacy landscape. Security models are built around what designers imagine adversaries will try. Physics does not care about what designers imagined. Every sensor, every wireless interface, every side channel is a potential exfiltration path the moment someone smart enough to think about it decides to try. The gyroscope is one example. The accelerometer is another. The hard drives, mechanical vibrations, the CPU's electromagnetic emissions, the screen's acoustic radiation as pixels refresh. Each has a paper behind it showing that data you assumed was private leaks through a channel you did not know existed. What this means for how you should think about privacy is not paranoia. It is calibration. When someone tells you an app cannot spy on you because it does not have microphone permission, they are speaking from the 2010 threat model, not the 2026 one. The permission system is a necessary tool, but not a sufficient one. Your defense is reducing attack surface, preferring audited software, understanding what information your devices emit, and recognizing that the phone in your pocket is not a single device, but a collection of sensors, any of which can become a weapon against you if the software running on it is hostile. The Stanford researchers who published Gyrophone ended their paper with a simple recommendation. Restrict the sampling rate of motion sensors to frequencies below the human voice band. It was a straightforward fix, more than a decade. Later, the fix is only partially implemented across the ecosystem. That delay is not negligence alone. It is the tension between security and utility that defines every privacy decision in the devices you carry. The gyroscope does more than track rotation. It tracks the world around it. And the world around it includes your voice.